Greetings, Manibil here. Let me see if I can finish this series of videos, and there's about 13 minutes left of Absolute Philosophy's video that I'm using as an inspiration for digging into further problems in Bernardo Kastrup's philosophy. More specifically, his analytic idealism. And I was just yesterday I was wondering about the whole idea of the term analytic idealism. So what's actually entailed in being analytic? Because me being a sort of a natural educated in the natural sciences, analysis is when you are trying to compile data and try to extract the kind of information from it you want, or you're trying to look for, right? Trying to make sure you're not over-interpreting or interpreting, making, working with an Excel sheet or something like that, right? That's a kind of an analysis I would be thinking of when I guess there could be some kind of old school, old established idea of what it means to do an analysis within philosophy. But what could it possibly be that is different from other kinds of thinking? Well, isn't philosophy just philosophy, right? Why does it have to be specifically narrowed down? Okay, but this is analytic idealism. Compared to what, right? Is it just to say, I have found my particular little pet way of arguing for my shit, and I'm going to give it a name in order to sort of justify it a bit, right? If I call it analytic idealism, so if you think there's something weird about my philosophy, well, that must be because it's analytic, so it's special, right? There's just something about it, it comes across as appealing to some sophistry of some kind, right? There's also another thing that I was reminding myself of, that one of the reasons there might be so many different kinds of philosophy, in particular when we're dealing with ontology/metaphysics, right? You could also say within ethics, maybe. But in particular, I was thinking that it ends up being a trench warfare, because usually, or I would suppose that often somebody who's arguing for a particular philosophy, for instance, materialism or idealism or solipsism, whatever. I don't think solipsists are arguing for, because then they wouldn't come across as solipsists, right? But you know what I mean. That they need the other camp in order to validate their own philosophy, which is exactly a critique point I also had and it's a minor critique point of his philosophy, because it's sort of indirect, the indirectness of it. It's like trying, the sophist trick is this: I will create a dichotomy, appeal to a dichotomy. There is this way of doing it, and there's that way of doing it. I have this way of doing it. There's the other ones who are doing the other way of doing it, right? Now I'm going to tell you how bad the other ones are at their philosophy, right? Which will inevitably hopefully lead you to conclude that's a bad philosophy. So you will inevitably have to go and adopt mine, because it's the only other alternative, right? So it's like you're using other people in order to qualify your own philosophy, right? That's exactly what Bernardo Kastrup does, because when he presents his analytic idealism on his Essentia Foundation page or YouTube channel, He talks about all the other philosophies and how bad they are at doing what they're doing. And then they say, but I have the solution, right? It's what do you call that? It's not bait and switch, but it's, I think there's an official fallacy for this, right? By pointing fingers at somebody else and then say, well, therefore mine is best, right? Mine is not necessarily best, but it's something like, who wasn't it, Churchill, who is supposed to have said, democracy is a bad way of doing it, except for all the others who are even worse, or something like that, right? So it's the lesser of two evils, maybe, right? If you're pointing fingers at the others and saying, oh, they're so bad at philosophy, then if there's only one other alternative and that is yours, then they will flock to yours. Or hopefully that's the, right? I am in the business of saying, I have my philosophy. I don't care about the other. I don't want to try to argue for why my philosophy is good based on somebody I classify as bad, right? It's not a relative game in that sense. It's a straight up absolute game for your own sake. It's your philosophy. You're the one describing your experiences and your phenomena, whatever you want to call it, right? And what kind of thinking you based on that? That is your philosophy. You can't... It's also a circular bad argument in the other thing I just mentioned, right? By pointing fingers. You have to have a philosophy in order to point fingers at the others, and then you can't use that as a foundation for why your philosophy is good. You have to work from your own philosophy and argue for that, right? You can't argue for why you have a good car by pointing fingers at the car dealer across the street and say, they have bad cars, therefore you should buy my car, right? Your cars might just be slightly less bad. Or even worse, maybe you're just good at making it look like it's slightly better, right? Because of words and salesman's pitch and a used car salesman, whatever, right? The scum of the earth, right? Used car salesman. So, just my thought, right? Okay, let's get into absolute philosophy here.
Form of consciousness, metaconsciousness. And metaconsciousness means that we are able to reflect on and gain knowledge of our phenomenal experiences. On the other hand, Kastrup says...
I want to hear that again. I wasn't completely sharp there. Let me hear it again.
Metaconsciousness. And metaconsciousness means that we are able to reflect on and gain knowledge of our phenomenal experiences. On the other...
Gain knowledge of. Every time that people mention the word knowledge, it might be used in, the average mainstream way of using the term know or have knowledge. And I do that sometimes also because that's how people generally talk about whatever they are experiencing. They know their experiences, so to say, right? But when a philosopher does it, right, and we're dealing with these aspects of philosophy that are before epistemology and the definition of knowledge, I would very much like to scrutinize the use of the term know, right? It's like, I find it problematic that people who are apparently educated in philosophy don't understand the structure of what you can possibly claim within what. If you're starting with something, doesn't mean I have experience of elephant, done. Now I can do whatever I want in philosophy, right? There are things that has to be settled, and I repeated this over and over and over again, right? You have to settle this before you do this. And then you have to settle something here before you do the next thing. And you settle something here before you do further things, and so on, right? Until you get to the end of whatever you want to do with your philosophy, right? And say, done, now it's done. Now I have the whole structure here, right? But if you have these, let's say, 8 steps in your philosophy, and step number 5 is knowledge. You can't talk about knowledge in step number 2 and 3, right? Because you need that step, all of that settled before you do step 5. Or you reach step 5. And this loose use of terms of this kind of significance, like knowledge, is to me a sign that generally academia is completely fucked up. They have completely lost touch with what they're doing, right? They have drilled themselves into so many abstractions and so many ideas and so many categories. Just take a look at meta-ethics, for instance, right? It's fucking blown out of the water, man, right? It's completely ridiculous. And the same goes for this. And it's all over the place. Every philosophical idea or category is all over the place and everywhere, right? So everything is completely confused. No wonder that people think that philosophers are basically weird, crazy morons sitting over in the corner being skeptical, right? Or something like that, or having some weird ideas like panpsychism or analytic idealism, where everything is mind. And no wonder people think that this is fucking crazy, man. Why do I need philosophy? They're just mental cases, right? No wonder philosophy has a bad rep, right?
On the other hand, Kastrup says that universal consciousness is only phenomenally conscious, in much the same way we might think that a mouse or an amoeba may be conscious of the world around it without being able to reflect on their own experience.
Yeah, but that's just grabbed out of his ass, basically, to put it in French terms, right? He has no way of arguing for this. He has allowed himself to go out in that external world and tell you about how it's somehow composed, right? And what it does and so on, right? How it functions, at least to some extent. And then he just goes and grabs whatever he wants. Because you can't go and check it, obviously, because it's not a part of your phenomena, right? So you can never check what the hell he's doing or saying or claiming. He's just sort of building one abstraction upon another abstraction, coming up with very weird stories about what is going on there and the intentions or whatever, or lack of intention of this big mind out there, right?
Experiences. My complaint with Kastrup's view is that he says universal consciousness is only phenomenally conscious. But if you do that, you straight away lose many of the advantages you gain by being an idealist. Remember that one of the reasons to take idealism seriously is that it solves the hard problem of consciousness. Idealism says that consciousness just is the basic stuff of the universe. So then you don't need to explain how consciousness could arise from something else like matter. But if Kastrup now starts with a lower form of consciousness, phenomenal...
I think it's a... What's the fallacy? It is pretending, it is alluding, it is claiming to be a... It's like saying... If you say that everything is mind, then every problem is solved. There are no problems anymore because everything is mind. Right? Det er sådan en one size fits all solution, right? Everything is, yeah, but it's because everything is mind. If I go down to the grocery store, I forgot my money or something like, well, everything is mine, right? If I can't find my bicycle, well, it's because everything is mine. It's sort of it's a useless explanation because it doesn't explain anything, right? Everything is X, right? Everything is X. Therefore, solution. It doesn't work. It doesn't explain anything. It doesn't explain the hard problem, in my opinion, right? Because first of all, he cannot go and claim that which he claims about an external world, in my opinion. But even if he could, he claims it to be some kind of ripple. Why does a ripple become the smell of chocolate or or the feeling of a stomach pain or whatever, right? I don't feel that that's an explanation. That just seems like some weird abstraction that is supposedly an explanation, right? I don't feel anything is being explained by saying ripple, right? It's not good enough for me to be qualified as an explanation. And I would say personally, you cannot explain. Stop looking for all these explanations, right? And another thing is that if you're doing science, you're not looking for an explanation. You're just looking for a empirical story about what's going on, right? Based on some abstractions like matter, for instance, right? It's just a more rather than saying, okay, I see volcano. I have an idea of a volcano god. Therefore, volcano god is responsible for whatever comes out of the volcano, right? That's one story. I mean, it's a theory, you could say, right? But some other competing theories are like, well, Earth is a big ball, right? Based on this observation. And then the big ball has layers, and these layers are moving about on top of the Earth. And sometimes, because of the gravity, the insides of the Earth is very hot, and everything is melted. And because of these layers that moves about on top, sometimes the layers get apart, and some of this boiling hot magma is spewing out because the plates. That's another story. That's another theory, right? Which one would you? You can see the scientific approach is to get to the most complete story based on whatever all other kinds of cognitions that are going right. Cognition like Earth, cognition like tectonic plate, cognition like magma, understandings like temperature and gravity, and concepts like abstractions like that, and use these established cognitions and ideas and theories and put them together in order to, quote, explain. But you're not explaining anything, right? It might depend a bit on what you mean by explain. But to me, you never get to an explanation, because it's always, well, why did my car keys hit the floor? It was because I dropped them, right? But that's not an explanation. That's just a series of events that one follows from the other. It's not an explanation as such. It doesn't explain the keys. It doesn't explain my hands. It doesn't explain why it moves. It doesn't explain anything. It is it's because of gravity. Okay, but what is gravity then? Well, I don't know what gravity is, but it's that which makes things do this, that, and the other. So nothing is ever explained. You're just getting to a more coherent and more useful story about what is going on. That is in itself not an explanation, right? So this fetish with explanation is grinding philosophy into the ground, right? People get stuck in the need for explanation. You can never get to an explanation. So,
consciousness. He then needs to explain how it is that meta-consciousness, a higher form of consciousness, arises in the first place. Now, I don't think this is quite as difficult as the problem of explaining how consciousness arises from something unconscious like matter. But why make life difficult for yourself anyway? If you start with meta-consciousness, then everything else can follow quite easily. But it's not obvious how meta-consciousness could arise from something like phenomenal consciousness. Now,
I don't know about this, right? Then you need to go and do some ontology, dude, right? Because now you're sort of this midstream kind of philosophy here. Now you need to show what you're working from. If you're starting to explain things, this can follow from this and that can follow from that. That's actually an approach to doing an ontology. So go and do that. I'm not buzzing you around, but I would appreciate that. Do some ontology. Tell me what there is in your experience, in your phenomena. qualify them, quantify them, whatever you need, categorize them, and show their interdependencies. Can you have meta-consciousness before you have consciousness and in your ontology? That's what you need to do, right? Well, everything in good times, as they say, or something like that, right? But, yeah, I just want to point out that in order to be good at criticizing or qualifying, judging the quality of somebody else's philosophy, you do need to have a good deal of your own philosophy. And one thing you might need to have is an ontology, and start from that, so you know your weaknesses and strengths and so on, at least your weaknesses, right? And what you can actually, I don't want to say what you can actually criticize, because you can always criticize. If you can find directly contradictions and so on in somebody else's philosophy, fine. A contradiction is a contradiction, no matter what your own philosophy is, right? But it's maybe it's just a, I don't want to jump on absolute philosophy here, right? But maybe it's just a wish of mine that there's so much presentation of cherry-picked argumentation, right? I will criticize this little bit here and create a video and then done, right? I'm not going to present my ontology or my metaphysics or my epistemology or anything like that. I mean, show me somebody who has done some epistemology and say, aha, and here we arrive at my definition of knowledge. Show it to me. I mean, it is so rare that it's incredible, right? You can possibly find some high-flying academic who has come up with some weird article on epistemology, but, obscure, right? It's like, but, people just throw around the term knowledge and left and right, and, right? I mean, at least a guy like Bernardo Kastrup is trying to start from the ground and work his way up, right? He's not particularly good at it, but at least he does that, right? And that's also one of the things I like about the David Hume's approach. He was doing that, at least to a very large extent, right? He might be a very sort of interested in getting the shovel under the Christians, right? I wouldn't reject that as an incentive for why he wrote his treatise, but his approach is starting with ontology, starting with first principles, right? And working his way up from that. Yeah, just my 2 cents, right?
Kastrup does explain his reasons for starting with phenomenal consciousness, but once again, it's related to evolution.
We are self-aware. We have...
No, but then you need meta-consciousness in order to get to the idea of evolution. You cannot experience evolution. A cat cannot experience evolution, right? You have to have what they call meta-consciousness in order to be able to get to an idea of evolution. So, and that meta-consciousness, in my opinion, is based on that consciousness of if you didn't have colors and sounds and taste or cognitions like elephant and so on, you wouldn't have an idea of evolution, right? So it comes back to this idea of the structure of your ontology, in my opinion, which is very important here, because it mostly puts limitations on what you can claim, right? A lot of what you create in philosophy is all in order to put limitations on what you can possibly claim. And it seems to me that most philosophers are more concerned about not being rigid in order to be able to claim what they want to claim, right?
Of what psychology calls metacognition. And this metacognition as a mental function has evolved at very great cost over 4 billion years of evolution on a planetary ecosystem. the universal consciousness did not have to undergo evolution within a planetary ecosystem. It never has had to react to environmental challenges and eke out a living. It is unlikely that it is metacognitive itself, because metacognition very much seems to be the end result of 4 billion years of evolution. So we have it. I think we can say with some confidence that the universal consciousness outside highly evolved life forms is not metacognitive.
So Kastrup says that human minds have become metaconscious through a process of evolution, as we've struggled to survive.
He cannot possibly say anything about that, because he doesn't have access to other minds, right? Or other, whatever is going on out there beyond his own experiences, right? Because he has created this access of his own to this external world, all of a sudden he feels that he is now able to tell you what is going on, and in his opinion about what is going on or not going on out there is apparently valid, because he allowed himself access to that just via his imagination, right? And this is when we get into what I would call woo-woo territory, right?
Survive on our planet. And since primitive forms of life are only phenomenally conscious, he thinks it stands to reason that universal consciousness, being the foundational form of consciousness, must itself also only be phenomenally conscious. Now, given what I've already said about...
and this is pure fabulation. It's just he's guessing, I suppose, this, that, and the other. I guess that that creature is out there, and that it doesn't have... There's so much imagination based on imagination, abstraction, and whatever, so on, right? In order to get to an idea of... And at the end of the day, what it always have to lead back to an understanding of how things work in a way that comforts him in how he wants to live, right? And it always ends up being he is on the right side of an undisclosed idea of what ethics is, right? There is no philosopher, to the best of my understanding, who has argued ahead and arrived at a moral principle where he or she figures out, oh my God, I'm immoral, right? They always seem to find an explanation of morality where they are on the right side of the border, right? And they have come up with an idea of what is going on that fits what they want. And also the idea of the meaning of life, the meaning of my life, or the meaning of everything, and so on. It has to fit with this. And if you are going the route around metaphysics in order to get to a meaning of life, you are in woo-woo territory. There is no arguing against that. You look because you can't find it in direct experience. Those are just tomatoes and bicycles and so on. Boring, right? No, I have to go into my cloud castles. There I can come up with a meaning of my life. And then I can come back and tell you, this is the meaning of life, right? It's pure mysticism.
Evolutionary theory, you can probably already see why I'm not convinced by this argument. Evolutionary theory is only meant to be a theory of the dashboard, and time is only meant to be a theory of the dashboard as well. So I'm not too sure why we should think universal consciousness...
That's right. At least it is based on observation and interpretation of the dashboard. So when you interpret something, what you can claim about it is only what is going on the dashboard, I would say, right? But that's also, as Absolute Philosophy correctly points out, then Bernardo Kastrup and other people project that into an external world as something that is going on there. You can't do that. That is correct. Nothing about that dashboard, according to his own standard, can be projected into that, right? It's like saying that there are dials beyond his dashboard, right? Oh, well, the dial is at 5. I have interpreted it as this, and therefore that interpretation is out there and influencing how... No, Absolute Philosophy is correct about this. Stick to your own principles, Bernardo Kastrup, right? if you're talking about your dashboard, you're talking about your dashboard. You're not talking about something beyond your dashboard, right? It's quite simple, but he can't even stick to it, right?
Would be more like earlier forms of life. Similarly, our human minds are meant to be part of the realm beyond the dashboard as well. So, since that is a timeless place, it seems hard to understand how our human minds could undergo evolution. But there is an even bigger problem for why an appeal to evolution simply won't work within analytic idealism. And it's a problem that's so big, in fact, that I'm genuinely amazed Kastrup doesn't notice it. Think about it. For evolution to work, there needs to be a mechanism that allows for a series of small changes to build up over many, many generations into big changes. The way it works in biology is through the process of procreation, where slight changes in the generations are maintained within the genetic code, which is then passed on from parent to child. The problem for Kastrup is that the mechanism for evolution just can't apply to minds. According to analytic idealism, the parent of every mind is universal consciousness that gives birth to them through the process of dissociation. My mind, your mind, the minds of Homo erectus, and the minds of every other stage within our supposed evolutionary journey have emerged not from their biological parents, but from universal consciousness itself. So there are no generations of mind that could allow for small changes to build up into big ones. So within analytic idealism, we are all first generation.
Yeah, but then he has his trump card, right? Which is, well, it is beyond your experiences, right? It just does shit out there that you can't get to. So everything he can't explain now, he's just shoving it into the external world and say, it does what it does, right? So now an explanation for Bernardo Kastrup has become, well, but my big mind daddy is doing on, I can't. No, what is it that Christians say? The ways of God is inexplicable or something like that, right? It's the same approach. Well, I'm just too stupid. I'm not allowed to. It does what it does, right? And that's where all explanations are shoved. So that's and now we are deeply into Bernardo Kastrup's mysticism, right?
Of mind that share the same mental parent. And that's a big problem for any attempt to use evolutionary theory.
The mind at large apparently is mind-fucking itself in some genetic evolution.
Applied to minds within analytic idealism. What Kastrup could say is that universal mind itself evolves alongside the evolution of human minds. Perhaps every time we die, our minds are released back into universal consciousness, and any change that we undergo goes...
Yeah, but if... It's just that it might be a bit of a rabbit hole, this evolution thing, that is very, very difficult to handle for Bernardo Kastrup, right? And I'm just saying, just leave evolution alone. It's a theory. It's not a what is, right? Because the theory is based on what is, an experience on some particular evidence, right? Or some particular cognitions that are then classified as evidence of this, that, and the other, right? So it is abstract or imaginative in nature. So you don't have to explain it as some kind of existence, which is ontology, right? So it's basically science. Evolution is a kind of science, so it has nothing to do here in the first place, right? It's just he is trying to grab anything he can get away with that might convince you that he's on some kind of valid damn fool crusade of idealism, right? And that is some valid crusade against physicalism. Yeah, physicalism is stupid, right? But it's this sort of cherry-picking arguments, right? Oh, find something in a book there, and somebody wrote in the 1700s this, and then this sounds like what and Schopenhauer also said, so therefore it's sort of cherry picking here, there, and there. I'm not saying that these arguments are not to be taken seriously, but it doesn't sound like it's coming from him, right? It seems like he's cherry picking somebody else to tell you, a third party, how to put this together in this quilt of arguments that could sound like there's some cohesiveness to this analytic idealism. I just don't see it now, right?
It's back to universal consciousness as well. This would allow those small changes to build up and be preserved within universal consciousness. And this is actually something that Kastrup seems to think anyway.
The contents of your dissociative process, all the insights, all the maturity.
Speak about your own processes, right? Don't tell me how I work. Tell me how you work, right? Don't lecture me about myself. Lecture me about you, right?
You've acquired. All of those gains are not lost. They are released in a broader cognitive context. They are made available to the mind of nature, to mind at large.
Basically,
okay, so this is where it goes really at the deep end of mysticism, right? So that mind at large, right, is creating, for whatever reason that cannot be gotten to, right? These dissociations that are apparently there to be metaconscious, because the big mind itself cannot be metaconscious. So you have to be a spy for the big mind to look at the big mind itself so it can understand itself. But then it sucks you dry of this metaconsciousness, but that metaconsciousness just float around out there, right? It's a really, it's a really far-fetched mystic. I mean, it's pure imaginative. It's wholly imaginary, right? It is just grabbed out of his mental ass, right? I have no. I would rather, live alone in the woods than try to adhere myself to this kind of thinking. Why the hell do I need it, right? I mean, as I pointed out, the problems of the circularity of metaphysics. It's either circular or it's useless, right? It's either begging the question problem, or there's nothing to gain because you can't change anything about your foundations anyway, right? So it's more like a psychological, mystic avenue into getting some mental safe space away from direct experiences that can make you feel good about your shitty little life, right? In my opinion. That's the best way I can put it in the short term, right?
The idea here, if he went with it, would be that any small change to human minds would be released back into universal consciousness, making universal consciousness itself like some big cosmic mental genetic code. Kastrup could even go further and repeat the idea of genetic mutation, saying that each time universal consciousness dissociates, sometimes there are errors that produce a very slightly different kind of mind. Now,
that's what the one of the big problems that absolute philosophy also alludes to, which is, well, he's going to come up with theories, scientific theories, right? Theories about what goes on in that external world. And then he will try to look at his dashboard to find evidence for that theory he has, while he at the same time claims that the dashboard is nothing like what is out there, right? So he's first saying, I have a dashboard that is nothing like what is on an external world that is not disclosed how I got to. It's pure imaginary, that external world, without any further clarification. And then he's saying, it is different, but it impinges itself on my dashboard. So when I look at my dashboard, I just have to look at the right way. Then I will have some insight into that external world. But he just said that it's a different paradigm. You can't use one paradigm to describe another paradigm, right? So it's all basically screwed up from the foundations, what he's doing, Bernardo Kastrup, right? It's never going to fly.
I am not advocating for this evolving mind view applied to universal consciousness, but it's the kind of view you would need if you were going to explain how metaconsciousness could arise from phenomenal consciousness within the analytic idealism framework. But even if you did adopt this view, there would still be a lot of problems you would need to sort out. Like, how does time apply to universal consciousness and human minds behind the dashboard? What mechanism could there be to preserve only the good changes to mind to push us along the process of evolution? And even if you sorted those problems out, universal consciousness would still be, now at least, metaconscious. But I don't think even Kastrup should take this evolving mind route anyway. As he admits, there's no reason to think that universal consciousness evolves. The theory of evolution says that we evolve due to the...
No, he says it is what it is and it does what it does. That sounds like something that doesn't evolve, right?
...needs to survive. But universal consciousness has no such need. So there would be no reason to think that universal consciousness would evolve. So since Kastrup's appeal to evolution is so weak, is there another reason why he says that universal consciousness is only phenomenally conscious? Well, I think there is, and at one point he lets it slip.
If you apply the word God to it, then you have a...
Yeah. If you apply the word God to it. Yes, let me just cherry pick a random word and attach it in order to, instead of calling big mind or consciousness at large or pure subjectivity, let me find a good word. God, right? Of all the words you could possibly cherry pick, of course it's going to be God, right? Because now we need to pander to all the crazy child abused people out there who has had religion inflicted on them since they were very, impressionable young children, right?
God, there is a natural God, a God that acts spontaneously. It does
does a lot of shit, and that's why there were 270 million people killed by their own government in the 20th century. It's because the God has no control of itself. It hasn't evolved. It's stupid, and it's like it just does what it does. You have to accept it and look at it. Just be observant, right? You're not here to judge the big mind. No, you're here to pay attention, right?
It does because it is what it is. Not because it has a plan, not because it has thought things through, not because it has a premeditated idea about...
Now, and this is also the point where analytic idealism is becoming dangerous, right? Because religious people have been inflicted with the idea that they are subordinate to something that is much more important than themselves. They're basically just little servants of this big thing that they can't see and can't experience and so on, right? But have been inflicted on themselves children. And they are also in the game of, it goes through all of history since far back in antiquity that the rulers have called themselves gods, because gods are those that people fear, right? And if they're good friends with the gods, or they are gods themselves, then people fear them, right? So this is why analytic idealism is absolutely fucking dangerous, mystic bullshit that some crazy psychopathic ruler at some point is going to take advantage of and then shove it up your ass and use to control you, right? Because he just does what he does because he is what he is, right?
Where it wants to go. And to me, at least, this is comforting. Because a metacognitive God...
Who's looking for comfort, right? This is not a mental safe space we're doing. We're doing philosophy here, right? It's not to make you feel good, right? That's sort of the end goal. Whenever he has done his presentation of his philosophy, and it makes me feel good, mommy. It makes me feel good. I have daddy issues, right? But it's not about feeling good. Because then I will have to deduce that you are cherry-picking your philosophy and having a narrative or an agenda or a bias and letting yourself lead yourself to conclusions because it leads to wherever you want to go and not because it's necessarily good philosophy. You're just very good at finding various shit here, there, and everywhere to make it plausible, at least attempting to, that there's something to it, something to this weird metaphysics, right?
That allows for this bloodbath that survival in a planetary ecosystem is, would be a sadistic God, wouldn't it?
My suspicion is that this is the real reason why Kastrup wants to avoid
Okay, so he comes up with, he just says, it would be sadistic, so I've decided he's not sadistic, it is not sadistic, because I want it to, it sounds much better than, it just does, it just happens, right? All the people in the gulags, it's just what happens, right?
That universal consciousness is metaconscious. He thinks it would make it too much like the god of monotheism and might tie up his view with theological concerns over the problem of evil and might tie it with other kinds of religious conceptions that he would rather avoid. But this, again, seems like an irrational reason not to say that universal consciousness is metaconscious. The problem of evil arises in monotheism because we are not God, and so our suffering is obviously not his suffering. But under analytic idealism, our suffering is the suffering of a dissociated alter of universal consciousness. So that means that our suffering is also the suffering of universal consciousness itself, even if in dissociation.
Yeah, he's getting a little brainy now, right? I'm sort of losing track of what the hell he's talking about, but so be it. What I'm concerned about also is that, there's a tendency to people to classify analytic idealism as a kind of cult. And I would understand why. Because as soon as you leave other people, or as soon as you leave into your cloud castle, your mental, you go away from direct experiences and enter into pure mind, or whatever you want to call it, then people listening to it no longer have their own ability to experience whatever you're talking about by definition. So you have to come back to your master, Bernardo Kastrup, and ask him, hey, what is out there? Can you describe the ripple analogy for me, right? Oh, talk about the ripple, Mr. Priest, right? That is cultish, because then it's one person who has the narrative, and you always have to come and ask that person for that narrative. You are not allowed to think for yourself and experience for yourself. It goes so deep in all these cults. It's always one person who has the answers, right? And you just have to pay attention. I mean, without saying cultish, you're basically saying cultish by the way things are working in this Essential Foundation, right? So, that's something to be concerned about.
Form. So it'd be very odd to accuse universal consciousness of being sadistic or evil just because its mental activity causes suffering to itself in the form of a dissociated alter. Think of the analogy with a human. If a person with dissociative disorder suffers while one of its alters is in control, that doesn't make the host integrated mind sadistic. That mind didn't cause the suffering of the alter, it suffers with it. And in some sense, it suffers as it and because of it. Now, perhaps this further idea of
Yeah, but you discussing DID this way is implicitly accepting that he's allowed to bring DID into the discussion. He isn't, because DID is science. It's not ontology or epistemology. So you have to say you're better off clarifying that he can't bring in DID. Shove that DID in your bum until you get to the point where you have defined knowledge, right? So you can do this science called DID. So it's also a sophist trick to bring in something you're not allowed to, but then people start to discuss it, whether the contents of what you're bringing in is useful. But that's not the problem. It's bringing it in the first place that is the problem. But if you discuss it this way, you're basically allowing him to bring in dissociative identity disorder. And that's what he wants because he's a sophist, man, right?
Universal consciousness suffering with its alters, and in some sense because of its alters, has certain shades of Christianity. But if so, the perception is very much altered within the analytic idealism framework, and it certainly seems to blunt the obvious criticisms levelled at Christianity related to the problems of evil. And this consideration brings me to another curiosity I had when looking at Kastrup's work. He presents analytic idealism as the explanatory model of reality. But once he does, he seems to stop thinking in terms of analytic idealism when he turns to look at criticisms and objections to his theory. In some ways, Kastrup seems to be like a scientist that presents an entire theory of the world, and then forgets that if it really is a theory of the world, then everything else must be explained in terms of it. And that would include him, his experiences, and even the theory itself. It would all have to fit within and be understood from within that theory. I think that if Kastrup really thought through the implications of analytic idealism, he realized...
Actually, it might be even worse than that. He actually thinks he's a kind of God who's sitting outside the rest of that reality. He's the one telling you how it is. You're just living in it. He's sitting on his philosophical God throne, or the right hand of his God, right? Telling you how it is, because he's so special, right? He doesn't have to explain the foundations. He's just handing it to you. He's saying, mind, right? Deal with it. Pay attention. I have no patience with it.
That universal consciousness must at least be metaconscious, because I don't see any other way that our human minds could be metaconscious as dissociated alters of something that doesn't have that kind.
No, again, where does it come from? If everything is mind, then this metaconsciousness must also be a kind of mind. Otherwise, we are into dualism then, right? So even the way he presents his idea of this dissociation and all this, everything is mind and so on, it has huge problems. Because he appeals to things that cannot really fit with the picture he's trying to paint, right? As I think absolute philosophy is onto here. And it's great to see somebody else actually trying to get a grasp on the problems of analytic idealism. It warms my heart, so to say, right? That there are actually other criticizers out there. And I encourage you to keep going, Mr. Absolute Philosophy. And I forget your actual name, but it's not really important, I guess, right? But, thank you for sharing it at least, right?
Of consciousness. For one thing, the only cases of dissociation that we know of occur within a metaconscious mind. So there seems to be no reason to think that a process like dissociation could even occur within a mind that is purely phenomenally conscious. What's more, it seems highly
maybe there only is metacognition, but a part of that metacognition is the awareness of what we call cognition. It's still just metacognition. We're just classifying it as something else, right? How the hell would you know? No, but that's why you need ontology and philosophy and creating a system, creating a structure. And that is the foundation of the rest of your philosophy. And that goes for knowledge, objectivity, and the moral principle, right? There's no way around it. It has to be structured. You can't just come up with whatever you want, just like Bernardo Kastrup does, right? Basically, he's just inventing a story that makes him feel good about himself, in my opinion, right? And my last comment in this direction is, I would pose a principle that I would work from when I'm judging philosophers. Philosophers who are not parents. Philosophers or people presenting philosophy, and they are sort of well above, parenting age, right? And they don't have children, I don't trust their philosophy, right? Because I think that being a parent really gets you thinking about what is actually important and what it makes you more cautious about what you think, because you are more invested in your future or other people's future, in particular your children's future, rather than not having any children and saying, just do as the mind tells you to, right? You're more likely to be a weird dictator if you don't have children than if you have children are sort of concerned about the future, right? So.
Plausible to think that a metaconscious mind could suddenly arise through a process of dissociation from a mind that is merely phenomenally conscious. It would be like a worm getting some mental disorder and suddenly starting to reflect on its own experience. In conclusion, my humble advice to Bernardo Kastrup would be to take analytic ideas.
Yeah, so we are basically just having a weird illness, a weird, mental problem that make us fabulate about, holy shit, I am conscious. I think I have free will. And then Bernardo comes and says, no, you don't have free will. You're stupid. You just have to pay attention to the big mind that is, creating gulags and, pandemics, right?
Idealism seriously and follow through its implications. One of those, in my view, is that universal consciousness must be at least metaconscious and quite possibly a higher order of consciousness still. And if that makes Kastrup feel uneasy for less theoretical reasons, I would say he should just be brave and go where the evidence leads. But that's just my opinion. What I can say is that
the evidence, but philosophy is not about evidence. I mean, Mr. Absolute Philosophy. It's not so absolute after all, is it, right? You don't have evidence for philosophy, right? Evidence is when you are using your philosophy or you're using your consciousness or whatever term you're using, right? You experience an elephant. That's evidence. You have evidence of an elephant, right? Or the evidence could be, it comes from Africa, right? Elephant is evidence of Africa, you could say, right? An elephant is not evidence of elephant. It's a cognition of elephant. But it might be evidence that there's a zoo nearby and it, whatever, right? But that's not what you're doing when you're doing philosophy. You're thinking about what is a cognition? How do I approach it? Why does it have a color? Why do I have this feeling when I experience the elephant? Why am I hungry? And so on, right? What is it? How do I approach it? How do I classify it, clarify it, and so on? And how do I build from that and classify what I mean by knowledge, for instance? Because everybody seems to be using these terms without clarifying what the hell they mean, right? I would like some clarification. And, if you want it well done, maybe you should do it yourself, right? Think for yourself, philosophize yourself, do it yourself, right? I always encourage that. I think this is the end of this presentation. Let me see if there's
explanations for how metaconsciousness in human minds can arise from a starting point that is only phenomenally conscious needs a much better argument and explanation than the one he gives. Thanks for watching. I hope you found that enlightening. If you're interested in philosophy and idealism, then definitely subscribe and check back in. I'm going to be talking more about these topics over the coming weeks and months. And if you become a member, there's a whole load of exclusive videos that you have access to, and it helps me keep this channel going and try and grow the work that I'm doing here. In the meantime, here's a really great video that you might enjoy from the channel that's definitely worth a watch. And as always, until the next time, have a wise day.
A wise day, okay. Yeah, sure. Okay, nice job, Absolute Philosophy.
The philosopher Dr. Bernardo.
Let me just stop that one. I hope you appreciate my comments, and I encourage you to keep going criticizing Bernardo Kastrup as far as you feel it's necessary, right? And even more than that, maybe, right? But, we are closing in on the 1 hour mark here, so it fits neatly together as the last part of the series. I hope you enjoyed. Let me have your comments. And otherwise, have a nice day. See you in the next one.